Protests against the police killing of black men continued for a third straight day on Monday, with hundreds arrested across the country over last week's killing of Philando Castile in St. Paul, Minnesota suburb, and Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. More arrests were made in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for a second night in a row after protesters against brutality pelted police officers with objects. Some 102 people had been arrested less than 24 hours before. In Memphis, protesters shut down Interstate 40 bridge for hours on Sunday night to protest last week's killing.
And it's so beautiful to see my people and so many other people in different races coming together and making a stance and saying, you know what, we're tired of it. So let's move, let's do something, let's change. Today is the change, now is a change. You are the change, we are all the change, we are history, we are the future. So what are you going to do about it?
Arrests were also made in Minnesota after police clashed with protesters. Police were criticized by activists for using heavy-handed tactics and military-style gear. Police said those arrested ignored repeated orders to stay out of the street, while demonstrators said officers charged into the crowd, seemingly without any provocation. In Los Angeles, activists shut down the major 405 freeway in a spontaneous protest after hundreds showed up for an organizing meeting. Activists say they refused to leave until the media covered their story. We'll be interviewing Black Lives Matter Los Angeles organizers later this week. Kali Akuno is an organizer with the Malcolm X grassroots movement.
Encouraged that folks didn't retreat. That's a positive sign. And, stay off the streets and kind of, be in fear or, not know what the police are going to do. And I think to this point, San Francisco, Oakland, St. Louis, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Buffalo here where I'm currently at, there's been demonstrations and there's been more, determined show of force by the police than ever. And that people have not backed down, have not been scared, I think is a positive sign. And I just think it's more further indication that overall, that the center, the liberal political center, that as we have known it since, I think, World War II, it is fracturing and it cannot hold. And what is going to come out on the other end, I don't think anybody knows. But I think it's imperative for, left forces to get our act together more solidly so that we can play a role in determining what the outcome is.
Speaking on MSNBC this weekend, former New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani blamed the Black Lives Matter protesters for putting police lives in risk after a Dallas gunman killed 5 officers after a rally last week.
I think the reason that there's a target on police officers' backs is because of groups like Black Lives Matter that make it seem like all police are against blacks. They're not.
He's doing his job, and we need to recognize that. He's representing his interests. He's representing the interests of the ruling class, and the particular political segment and sector of the ruling class that he represented while he was a mayor, and he's tried to represent in his run for president. They are in crisis mode and in panic mode themselves, and I think that's something we need to be mindful of. And I hope, any young person who's engaging in the moment right now out in the street is kind of aware of that. They are going to try to put the genie back in the bottle, and it's not going back in. The fear that it kind of reigned for so long, I think it's basically been shook. And they're just going to try to restore law and order as they understand it and as they designed it. They're going to try to just reassert that. So you should see kind of maximum force like you're seeing in Baton Rouge. But I don't think, that type of fear is going to work with this generation. Because they basically fundamentally, they don't see any social gains. They don't see their lives improving in the way that their parents and grandparents saw their lives improving. So there's very little for a lot of young folks to lose, and they're very conscious of that. The fear and intimidation for many, particularly working class black people, Latinos, folks who have been forced to go in and out of prison now for several generations, that's also not a fear.
President Obama has called for calm and will make a national address in Dallas on Tuesday. Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force, backed by some protesters like DeRay McKesson, who is among those arrested over the weekend, focuses on training, oversight, and building community relations. but stopped short for calling for community control of police.
While he's kind of trying to offer some concessions in rhetoric, he's actually presided over the expansion of fusion centers all over the country. He's presided over a deepening and expansion of all the surveillance programs. He's presided over the massive roundup of immigrants, throughout this country at breakneck speed in record numbers, over the course of his 8 years, which requires massive amounts of both surveillance, intimidation, forces going deep into communities to capture and seize people, the massive expansion of prisons and detention centers in this regard. So we got this separate my point is, let's separate the rhetoric from the actual reality of what he's implementing. And what he's actually implementing and wholesale in our communities is the intensification of the actual structures of repression. That is, in fact, what he's doing. So I would encourage nobody to take his rhetoric seriously in any respect. And to the degree that there's been some kind of conversation about oversight of any kind of the police, look at what's happened in Ferguson over the course of the last 2 years, where the federal government basically kind of came in my opinion, undercut a local community effort that was going on throughout the greater St. Louis metro region, that was really trying to force some grassroots from the bottom up reform of the system. We put some real accountability measures in place. They kind of came in to supersede that, I think, very strategically and intentionally, to just create a state-to-state relationship, to where they would have a certain level of oversight. And then the Ferguson basically told them they weren't going to abide by it. Then they renegotiated the deal to extend the term. And so you basically got no fundamental change or reform. Just, we're going to come in and monitor it. If you look at what's happening, look in Oakland, for instance, they've been under a state monitor for almost 12, 15 years, going back to this latest one. And there's been no fundamental change in the actual practices of the police. So the actual struggle from the ground up to have some level of police oversight and police control, I think there's been more consciousness within the movement that this is kind of a reformist aim that might have some teeth to be able to monitor, fire, discipline police, but almost nowhere in the country have we seen it implemented. So there's a lot more that needs to be done to really figure out how do we gain the political power to actually force these things to happen.
From Baltimore, this is Jessel Noor.